She wondered if love could really be found again after so long. 26 years have passed since Mark, a successful millionaire, last saw the woman who stole his heart, a simple waitress named Emily. When he recognizes her in a busy restaurant, a whirlwind of emotions is unleashed, making him confront the past he thought he had left behind. What will he do now that the chance to get his lost love back is in front of him? Mark had always been a determined man. From a young age, his focus was on achieving success and wealth, and he became one of the most respected business people in the United States. However, behind his facade of confidence, there was a man haunted by decisions that led to an emotional void. He often remembered Emily, the girl who worked as a waitress in a small cafe, and how her smiles brightened his days. His dream of having a life with her had been interrupted by circumstances that seemed insurmountable, and, over the years, he tried to ignore this pain. Mark's life was marked by commitments and meetings, but loneliness always accompanied him. Although surrounded by people and wealth, he felt lost, as if a part of himself was missing. In his most introspective moments, he wondered if all his success was worth it if he couldn't share it with someone he truly loved. The memory of Emily, her laughter, and the way she made him feel alive wouldn't leave him alone. Every time he passed a cafe or saw a waitress, his heart would race, but he would force himself to move on. One morning, while heading to an important meeting, Mark decided to stop at a popular restaurant for coffee. He didn't expect that his life would change in that instant. When he entered, the smell of fresh coffee and the excited whispers of customers created a welcoming atmosphere, but he was anxious, thinking only about the business that awaited him. Then, as he looked at the waitress who was waiting tables, his eyes met Emily's. The image of her, so familiar and at the same time strange, made his heart stop for a moment. Emily, in turn, felt the weight of life on her shoulders. Working tirelessly to support her young son, she had learned to be strong and resilient. Although she had dreams of a better future, the reality of everyday life imprisoned her. She would never forget Mark, but she had buried her memories in a deep corner of her heart, trying to move on. When she saw Mark, her old feelings resurfaced like waves on a raging sea, but she hesitated. What would he do now? He was a successful man, but did he still remember her? The unexpected encounter brought to the surface emotions that both had tried to hide for so long. Mark felt a mix of joy and fear, while Emily was torn between the desire to relive the past and the fear of getting hurt again. Both were at crucial moments in their lives, and the choices they would make from that moment on could change everything. As they talked, small interactions revealed the essence of who they were. Mark asked questions about Emily's life, listening intently to every word. He noticed the strength in her voice, the determination she had cultivated over the years. To her, he was the man who had conquered the world, but who also seemed vulnerable when faced with his past. The conversations became deeper, and together they began to explore what it really meant to love and be loved. In this challenging environment of reconnection, each smile exchanged and each memory shared became steps towards an uncertain future, but full of possibilities. Mark, who had always prioritized material success, now questioned what was really worth in his life. The idea of sacrificing his never-ending quest for recognition for something more meaningful began to take shape in his mind. Emily, in turn, found herself in a moment of reflection. Mark's presence made her want to dream again, but it also reminded her of the pain of the past. She wondered if the love they once had could be rescued, or if it was time to leave the ghosts behind. While destiny brought them together again, they both found themselves faced with a dilemma. Could they allow themselves to love again, even after everything they had faced? This new chance would challenge them to confront their insecurities and rediscover what really mattered in their lives. What would they do with this unique opportunity? Could the past be healed, or would the mistakes they made still haunt them? Life had a curious way of joining paths, and now, amid memories and new hope, Mark and Emily were about to discover if love could truly overcome time and adversity. When Mark sat down at the breakfast table, his heart was still beating fast. He tried to focus on what Emily was saying, but his mind was filled with confusing memories and feelings. The conversation flowed between them, but it was clear that they both felt vulnerable. The words they exchanged seemed to carry an extra weight, as if each sentence could decide the direction of their lives. Emily, with her attentive gaze and delicate gestures, told Mark about her son, Lucas, who was about to turn 5. She spoke with a pride that lit up her face, but Mark could see the shadow of worry in her eyes. He noticed that she struggled to balance life as a mother and the demands of her job. The challenges of raising a child alone were great, and the daily struggle left its mark. "He's an amazing boy," Emily said, with a smile that, although genuine, hid a certain sadness. "But there are days when I wonder if I'm doing enough. What I would like to offer him, well, it's much more than I can." Mark felt a pang of pain upon hearing this. He was a man who had everything: money, prestige, and a successful career. But when he looked at Emily, he realized that those possessions meant nothing compared to what she really needed: support and love. "You do the best you can," Mark tried to comfort her, but his tone sounded more like an attempt to convince himself than a true statement. He remembered his own childhood, how he always felt pressured to achieve more than others. And now, seeing Emily, he felt that the pressure she felt was much heavier. I don't know what it's like to be a mother, but I admire your strength." Emily looked at him, and for an instant, Mark saw the young woman he had loved. That same light in the eyes, now more mature, but still full of life. "And you? How has your life been, Mark?" Her question took him by surprise. He hesitated, not knowing how to explain his journey. "I worked hard. Life has taken me to a very different place than I expected," he said, looking at his coffee cup as if the answers were there. "I always sought success, but sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. Loneliness is a high price to pay." She nodded, as if she understood those words without needing to be elaborated. Mark could see that life's challenges had made her wiser, stronger. "I lost myself for a while," he continued, feeling a rush of sincerity. "I lost touch with who I really am. And now, when I look at you, I realize that there is more to life than status or money." Emily smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her expression. "Life is complicated, Mark. We both know that. But it's hard to leave the past behind. Sometimes I wonder if you remember me like I remember you." The question made her hesitate. There was an underlying fear that the answer would not be what she expected. Mark wanted to say that he never forgot her, that she was always a part of him, but the words didn't come out. Instead, he remembered how he had left it all behind, how he had chosen ambition over love. I can't lie. I remember you every day, Emily. I always wonder what your life might have been like if I had stayed." He took a deep breath, trying to get his thoughts in order. "But now, I don't know if there's still a place for both of us in this world I built." Silence settled between them, heavy and full of unspoken meanings. Emily's gaze fell away, and he realized she was fighting her own emotions. Mark felt butterflies in his stomach as he realized that what they shared could be much more than a simple reunion. It was a test of their hearts, of their choices. At that moment, a louder customer interrupted the tense atmosphere. Mark's friend, Alex, entered the cafe, excited and loud as always. "Mark, what a surprise to see you here. And you too, Emily." He approached, not noticing the tension at the table. "What are you doing? Talking about the past?" Emily smiled, but her expression was a mix of relief and discomfort. Mark forced a smile, but Alex's presence brought a new layer of complication to the surface. Alex was a close friend of Mark, someone who always believed that success was synonymous with happiness. "Just remembering old times," Mark said, trying to maintain his composure. But Alex smiled, not understanding the depth of what was happening. "You guys should hang out more, you know? Mark, you are so focused on work that you forget to enjoy life. Life's not all about business, man." Alex laughed, but the lightness of his words weighed on Mark. He remembered the nights he sacrificed for meetings and social events, while leaving Emily and his love behind. Mark looked at Emily, who seemed uncomfortable with Alex's presence. He realized that his friend's words were, in some ways, challenging his new perspective. What really mattered to him? What was he willing to sacrifice for a chance at a fresh start? As Alex continued talking about his latest achievements and plans, Mark felt torn. He wanted to reconnect with Emily, but the voices of the past and the expectations of the present intertwined like a tangle of threads. He wondered if he could truly change, if he could rewrite his story without letting the ghosts of the past consume him. "I need to go," Emily said suddenly as she glanced at her watch. "Lucas is waiting for me." Her voice was steady, but there was a gleam of sadness in her eyes. Mark felt a lump in his throat. The opportunity was slipping away, and he didn't know how to stop it. "Can I help you with something? Can I see you again?" Mark asked, the urgency in his voice causing Alex to look up in surprise. But Emily hesitated, insecurity getting the best of her. I don't know if that's a good idea, Mark. Life is complicated." Her words echoed in his mind, a reminder of what was at stake. Mark felt like he was on the edge of a precipice. He knew he needed to face his fears, his doubts. "Please, Emily, don't let me go back to the void without trying. I want to understand what this means for us." With a last look that carried a mixture of hope and pain, Emily said goodbye. Mark stood there, his mind spinning and his heart heavy. He knew those moments would be decisive. What would he do with this new chance? Could the search for success finally be replaced by the search for love? He needed to decide, and time was ticking. Mark sat at the table, his mind racing, while the echo of Emily's words still rang in his ears. Life is complicated. He wondered if the simplicity of his choices and the path he had taken could really be called life. What he had built was a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. Emily's worried gaze followed him even as she said goodbye, and that image tormented him. The presence of Alex, who was still talking excitedly about his achievements, seemed like a cruel contrast to the reality Mark was facing. He looked at his friend, who was everything he ever wanted to be, successful, happy, surrounded by people who admired him. As Alex spoke, Mark felt suffocated by a wave of doubts. What did he really want? What was he willing to sacrifice for what he could have with Emily? "Mark, are you okay?" Alex interrupted Mark's thoughts, noticing that he was distant. "You look like somewhere else." "Just thinking," Mark replied, trying to regain his composure. But the truth was he was battling an internal storm. Emily's words about Lucas echoed in her mind. The fragility of being a mother alone, the daily struggle, and the impression that she felt inadequate. He felt an impulse to help her, to be a support. But how could he do that when he couldn't even deal with his own insecurities? As he left the cafe, Mark decided he needed some time to reflect. He walked through the streets, the city lights mixing with the thoughts that tormented him. What he had built in his life didn't seem worth it without someone by his side. The ambition that had driven him for years now felt like a prison. He felt like a prisoner of his own choices, and the idea of starting over terrified him. The next day, while reviewing documents in his office, Mark was unable to concentrate. Emily's presence was in every corner of his mind. He remembered times when they laughed together, when their dreams were shared and not measured by numbers in a bank account. The memories were like a flame, lighting up the darkness he had created around him. The pressure of work began to take its toll again. Mark's boss demanded results, deadlines were tight, and competition increased. In a meeting, he was faced with harsh criticism. "You're not working hard enough, Mark. You need to try harder if you want to be respected here." The words cut like a knife. Mark felt like he was sinking into a sea of expectations that weren't his. What was respect, after all, if at the cost of it he was losing himself? The following nights became long and lonely. He lay awake, thinking about how he could reconnect with Emily, but every idea seemed distant and unattainable. The image of her and Lucas followed him, like a constant reminder of what he had left behind. He wanted to be part of her life, but the fear of failing once again paralyzed him. Then one day, while scrolling through social media, Mark saw a post from Alex. It was a photo of him with a new achievement, a prestigious award. A wave of envy and frustration arose. Was this what he really wanted? Being admired by people who didn't know your pain? Alex's life seemed like a distant dream, while Mark's became more and more a confusing reality. He decided he needed to act. The next day, Mark found the courage to call Emily. Heart racing, he waited while the phone rang. When she answered, her voice was soft, but there was a hint of hesitation. "Mark, how are you?" I can't stop thinking about you and Lucas. Can I see you? I want to better understand what happened, what we can do from here." He spoke sincerely, hoping his words would be enough to break the barrier that had formed between them. There was silence on the other end of the line. Mark held his breath, anxiety growing. "Mark, I don't know if this is a good idea. Life is already so complicated." Her hesitation was palpable, and he felt his heart sink. "I understand, but I want to try. I want to be part of your lives. I can't just let this slip away without fighting for you," he said, his voice full of determination. "However, things have already changed. I'm no longer the same Emily you knew. I have Lucas, and that changes everything." The vulnerability in her voice touched Mark deeply, and he realized he was asking a lot. Her life wasn't just about them, but about a future he couldn't imagine. "I know, but I'm willing to learn, to understand. I'm willing to take the risk." Mark felt stronger as he declared this, as if a new determination was dawning within him. After a few exchanges of messages, they arranged to meet. Mark prepared as if it were a big event, carefully choosing his clothes and rehearsing the words he wanted to say. But when he arrived at the agreed location, a new fear took over him. What if she didn't want to see him anymore? What if everything he was trying to rebuild fell apart again? As I waited, doubts began to grow. What could he really offer Emily? Would it be enough? He didn't want to be just a memory of the past. He wanted to be part of her future, but the ghosts of what he had done before haunted him. When Emily finally arrived, Mark realized there was more than just nostalgia between them. There was a new tension, an expectation. She was different, but she was still the same woman he loved. However, the fragility of her gaze made him realize that his own insecurities could be an additional weight for her. "Hi, Mark," she said, a shy smile on her lips. But there was a gleam of sadness in his eyes. He felt torn between hope and fear. "Hi, Emily." He tried to keep his voice steady. "I wanted to tell you that. I'm here. For you and Lucas. For whatever you need." The silence that followed carried a weight that they both seemed to feel. Mark knew the words were just the beginning. The real challenge was demonstrating your willingness to change, to sacrifice if necessary. And, with his heart racing, he prepared himself for the hardest battle of his life. The battle against his own fears and insecurities, for a future that could be more than just a distant memory. Mark watched Emily approach, his heart beating wildly. Her smile was shy, but there was something in that look that made him feel a mixture of hope and fear. She wasn't just a reminder of his past, she was a crucial part of the future he was trying to imagine. But the fragility he saw in her face reminded him that any false step could collapse everything again. "Hi, Mark," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. He responded with, "Hi, Emily," trying to convey the strength he felt inside, even if doubts still haunted him. The silence that followed between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words and repressed feelings. Mark knew he couldn't wait for the situation to go back to the way it was before. Things had changed, and he needed to change too. He remembered all the conversations they had, the laughter they shared, and the way she made him feel alive. But now, there was a new component in her life, Lucas. The boy's presence was a constant reminder that Emily wasn't alone, and that he couldn't just present himself as if nothing had happened. He needed to be part of her world, but how could he do that if insecurity still dominated him? "I wanted to tell you that. I'm here. For you and Lucas. For whatever you need," he said, trying hard to keep his voice steady. The words came out sincerely, but as he said them, a wave of doubt flooded his mind. What could he really offer? He wasn't a superhero, and the idea of becoming a support for Emily terrified him. The weight of responsibility seemed greater than he expected. Emily looked at him, and Mark noticed that her features were marked by the struggle she faced as a single mother. "Mark, I appreciate that. "But I don't know if you understand what that means," she said, the vulnerability in her voice touching him deeply. This conversation was becoming more intense, more emotional than he had anticipated. He wanted to protect her, but he wasn't sure if he was capable. "I want to try, Emily. I want to be a part of your lives," he insisted, knowing he needed to be clear. But at the same time, he wondered if he was being selfish. He wanted her to feel safe by his side, but what if he wasn't able to provide that? I can't promise it will be easy," she replied, the hesitation still present. "Life is complicated, as you said." Mark felt his heart sink at those words. He knew her life wasn't easy, that every day was a battle, but he also felt that, by her side, he could find a clearer path, a direction he was no longer sure even existed in his own life. The atmosphere between them changed, and the tension was palpable. Mark took a deep breath, deciding he needed to be honest. "I made mistakes, a lot of them. I tried to build a life based on success and recognition, but I realized that this is not enough. I got lost along the way," he confessed, his voice shaking slightly. "And now all I want is to reconnect with you." The words floated in the air, and he waited, anxiously, for her response. Emily's expression changed, and Mark saw a mix of compassion and sadness in her eyes. "Mark, I made mistakes too. I let myself get carried away with the idea that I needed to do everything alone. And for so long, I thought I wouldn't be able to accept anyone's help." Mark felt a surge of empathy. They were both fighting their own demons, and he realized this conversation could be a turning point. "Maybe we can help each other," he suggested, his words filled with hope. "I don't want you to face this alone." Emily smiled, a wider smile this time, but there was still a shadow of doubt. "This could be risky, Mark. What if it doesn't work? What if you regret it?" She was right. The risk was real, and he felt a knot in his stomach thinking about the consequences. But he knew he couldn't live in fear. What he feared most was moving away again, losing this connection that was forming. "I don't want to regret not trying. I don't want to live a life full of what ifs," Mark replied, his voice firmer now. The desire to change, to redeem himself, was becoming stronger than any fear. He wanted to be someone who could face challenges alongside Emily. And as he looked at her, he realized that his life could actually be more than a series of empty successes. They started talking about the past, about their insecurities and fears. Mark opened up about his struggle with self-confidence, how professional success never seemed to fill the void he felt inside. And as they spoke, the barrier between them began to break down. Emily also shared her struggles as a single mother, the pressure of being everything to Lucas and the fear of failure. The conversation deepened, and through the exchange of stories and vulnerabilities, Mark felt a new motivation emerge within him. He didn't just want to be a spectator in Emily's life. He wanted to be an active participant, someone she could trust. He wanted to be a support, but also a learner, someone willing to adapt and change for her and the boy. As the night progressed, Mark realized he was no longer just looking for a relationship. He was looking for a fresh start, an opportunity to become a better version of himself. The idea that true success was not limited to material achievements, but to meaningful human connections, began to take root in his mind. Mark knew he still had a long way to go, and that his insecurities wouldn't disappear overnight. But at that moment, he was ready to face the unknown. He felt stronger, more determined to fight for what really mattered. And as he looked into Emily's eyes, he saw not just a woman he had loved, but a potential partner, someone who could help him become who he truly wanted to be. What impacted him most was the realization that he was not only seeking happiness alongside her, but also the chance to redeem himself. And with this new perspective, Mark decided he wouldn't let his past failures get him down. He was ready to face challenges, to learn, grow, and, above all, love. Mark was sitting in his car, the engine off, but his mind was still racing. Emily's words echoed in her head. "I can't promise it will be easy." The truth hit her like a punch in the stomach. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but the idea of not trying, of walking away once again, was unbearable. The desire to reconnect with her and be a part of Lucas's life was stronger than any doubt that haunted him. He took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. What would become of his future now that he was willing to open up? Insecurities haunted him. He remembered his past failures, how he had lost himself in search of success and recognition. It was easy to get carried away by a comfortable life, but he realized that this search only took him away from true connections, like the one he had with Emily. The next day brought new light, but also a new wave of insecurities. Mark found himself thinking about how he should act around Emily and Lucas. He wanted to be the support he promised, but the uncertainty about how to fit into the new dynamics of her life made him anxious. He decided the best approach was to be honest and authentic. Yet the voices of doubt kept whispering, "What if you're not good enough?" After a day full of reflections, Mark decided to call Emily. Upon hearing her voice, a wave of relief washed over him. "Hi, Mark," she said, the familiarity of the words making his heart race. "How are you?" "Better, I think." "I'm thinking about how I can really help you and Lucas," he replied, feeling a knot form in his stomach. There was a vulnerability in her words that he couldn't ignore. "If you want, we can meet tomorrow." "It would be nice to talk about this more calmly," Emily suggested, and Mark felt a mix of anxiety and hope. The meeting could be an important step, but it could also reveal more about your insecurities. The next day, Mark prepared as if he were going to an important meeting. He chose a shirt that he thought would make her feel comfortable and spent time thinking about what he would say. The idea of being vulnerable made him uneasy, but he knew he needed it. What drove him most was the desire to not only be by Emily's side, but to be someone who could truly contribute to her life. When they met, the mood was light, but there was a subtle tension in the air. They sat in a cozy cafe, and Mark started talking about his feelings. "I realized that, for a long time, I was so focused on my achievements that I neglected the things that really matter. I don't want to repeat those mistakes," he confessed, his voice thick with sincerity. Emily looked at him with a mix of understanding and concern. "Mark, I'm scared too. Afraid to open up, to let you into my life again," she said, and Mark felt his heart sink. It was a reflection of what he felt too, but her willingness to share her insecurities encouraged him. "I don't want you to feel alone in this. We both have our struggles and maybe together we can find a way to deal with it," he replied, feeling like he was building a bridge between them. The conversation flowed, and they started to share more about their lives. Emily talked about Lucas, about the pressure she felt as a mother, and the difficulty of balancing everything. Mark listened intently, feeling the pain and beauty of her struggle. It was unfamiliar terrain, but he was determined to venture out. The experience brought them closer together, but it also made them confront their insecurities more intensely. Mark realized that his quest for success had been a way to escape his failures and fears. He remembered how many times he had isolated himself, prioritizing work over building relationships. The revelation hit him like a bolt of lightning. He didn't want to live that way anymore. "I wanted to connect, learn, and grow." However, the past was not willing to let them be so easily. The pressure to succeed and the expectation of being a solid support for Emily and Lucas weighed on him. Mark found himself struggling with the idea that he needed to have all the answers, that he had to be perfect to deserve a place in their lives. These thoughts consumed him, and in moments of solitude, he questioned whether he was really ready for this new beginning. Meanwhile, the changes in his life also affected Mark's friends. His best friend, Carlos, noticed the transformation. "You look different, man." "It seems that the search for success is no longer his only priority," Carlos commented in one of the conversations. Mark agreed, feeling like he was finally freeing himself from a weight that had been with him for so long. "I'm trying to find a balance. I want to be a better person, not just for myself, but for others," Mark responded, and Carlos encouraged him to continue on that path. His friend's words made him reflect on how his closest relationships also needed attention and care. At the same time, his relationship with Emily began to blossom, even in the midst of difficulties. They became a support for each other, sharing small moments of joy and also of sadness. Lucas, who initially looked at Mark with suspicion, began to open his heart, and this brought new meaning to Mark's life. The lessons he was learning were valuable. Every day, he encountered new challenges, but also new ways of facing them. You don't need to have all the answers, you just need to be present, he told himself, remembering that emotional connection was more important than any material success. And so, as Mark continued to rediscover himself, he realized that a true fresh start wasn't just about letting go of the past, but about embracing the uncertainties of the future. And, alongside Emily and Lucas, he was finally allowing himself to live fully, learning that, in the end, life wasn't just about achievements, but about the connections we formed along the way. Mark was sitting on a wooden bench in the park, watching the movement around him. The sun shone softly, and the laughter of children playing in the distance brought an air of lightness to the environment. Beside him, Lucas was focused on drawing on the floor with colored chalk. It was a simple moment, but for Mark, it had profound meaning. He smiled when he saw the boy dedicating himself to his art, without worrying about what others thought. Remembering how Lucas had initially looked at him suspiciously, Mark realized how far he had come. Their relationship was solidifying, and with each interaction, he felt like he was learning more about himself and the importance of connection. "What are you drawing, Lucas?" he asked, breaking the silence. The boy looked up, eyes shining with excitement. "It's a dragon! It flies high and has shiny scales," Lucas exclaimed, gesturing excitedly. Mark felt warm inside. The boy's imagination was a window to a world of possibilities, a reminder that life had much to offer beyond the pressures he used to feel. "Can I add something to your dragon?" Mark asked, and Lucas nodded, intrigued. Together, they began to create a scene around the dragon, with mountains and a radiant sun. As they drew, Mark felt lighter. It was as if every stroke they made together erased a little of the insecurities that tormented him. He realized that by opening up to Lucas, he was also allowing himself to be vulnerable. That night, Mark reflected on the day. He remembered a conversation he had had with Emily, where she had told him, "Sometimes we need to go with the flow and trust that things will fall into place somehow." That phrase echoed in his mind, and he began to understand that, although he didn't have all the answers, that didn't mean he couldn't enjoy the present. Over the next few days, Mark continued to make an effort to be a part of Emily and Lucas' lives. He offered to help with the housework, something he would have previously avoided for fear of not being good enough. He remembered his past failures, how he had stepped aside in times of need, and committed himself to being different. When he helped Emily organize a messy closet, laughing and talking along the way, he felt like he was building a new foundation in his life. "You have a talent for this, Mark," Emily said, smiling. "I never thought you were so good at tidying things." He didn't know if it was true, but the praise fueled his confidence. "Maybe I should have tried that sooner," he replied, and they both laughed together. The simple but meaningful interactions made him realize that success was not only measured by what he achieved at work, but also by the relationships he cultivated. One afternoon, as they talked about their dreams and desires, Emily shared her insecurities about being a mother. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not doing enough for Lucas," she confessed, looking down as if carrying an invisible weight. Mark listened to her carefully, realizing that she also struggled with her own flaws. He remembered how lost he had felt in his own quest for success and how it had taken him away from the people he loved. "You're an amazing mother, Emily," he said, his tone sincere. "Lucas is a happy child, and that's thanks to you. Don't cover yourself so much." He was beginning to understand that his experiences and failures could serve as learning and support not only for himself, but also for others. By sharing their insecurities, they both became stronger. The weeks passed, and Mark began to feel more secure in his new position in Emily and Lucas' lives. One day, while helping Lucas with his homework, the boy looked at him with admiration and said, "You're the best helper I've ever had." Mark felt a surge of joy. It was a validation he hadn't expected, but it meant a lot. He realized he was allowing himself to fail, and that wasn't a sign of weakness, but of courage. The fear of not being good enough was subsiding, and he began to trust himself more. When Carlos asked how things were going, Mark didn't hesitate to share. "I'm learning to accept my flaws and see that they are part of growth," he said. Carlos smiled, satisfied with his friend's transformation. "That's what matters, Mark. No one is perfect, and that's what makes us human," Carlos replied, and Mark felt a rush of gratitude. He realized that he had friends who supported him, and that friendship could be a fundamental pillar in his journey of self-discovery. As time passed, the relationship between Mark and Emily deepened. They began to support each other in their struggles, and together, they began to build a new vision of life. Mark learned to open up more, not just to Emily, but to everyone around him. He realized that vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness. That night, as he looked up at the stars, Mark reflected on everything he had learned. He accepted that life was complex and that he didn't have all the answers. But alongside Emily and Lucas, he was willing to keep trying, to take risks, and to grow. True success wasn't just in the achievements, but in the connections he formed and the steps he took toward a more balanced and meaningful future. That night, as the stars shone brightly in the sky, Mark became lost in his thoughts. He sat on Emily's porch, listening to the distant sound of laughter echoing from the park. There was something in the air that made him uneasy. He knew he was about to face one of the biggest challenges of his life. In the previous days, Mark had received a job offer that could be a big step forward in his career. It was a tempting opportunity, with an attractive salary and the chance to be recognized in your field. But there was a catch: he would have to move to another city, leaving Emily and Lucas behind. This decision tormented him. He found himself torn between ambition and the desire to remain close to the people who had become so important to him. As he looked up at the stars, Mark's mind wandered to memories. He remembered when he first met Emily, her smile, the way Lucas had looked at him with admiration as he drew in the park. Every moment they shared seemed to carry significant weight now. He didn't want to miss this. But the idea of feeling stagnant in his career again made him anxious. The next morning, Mark decided he needed to talk to Emily. He found her in the kitchen, where she was preparing breakfast. There was a gleam in her eyes, and it made him hesitate. How could he tell her about the proposal that could change him forever? "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice shaking slightly. She stopped and looked at him, her expression changing from curiosity to concern. "Is everything okay, Mark?" she asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision in his chest. He began to explain about the proposal, each word coming out with difficulty. "It's an incredible opportunity, but I would have to move. And I don't want to leave you." Emily listened in silence, her expression becoming more serious with each word. When he finished, there was a heavy silence between them. "Mark, you have to think about what's best for you." "I want you to succeed," she replied, but there was a tremor in her voice. Mark felt a stab of pain. He didn't want her to feel this way, like she was pressuring him to choose between ambition and love. "I don't know if I can leave you and Lucas," he said, almost in a whisper. "It's like I'm in a place where I finally feel happy, and now it can end." He looked into Emily's eyes, looking for any sign that she would support him. But what he saw was a mother, a woman who was struggling with her own fears. "I'm scared too, Mark. Fear of not being enough, of not being able to raise Lucas alone," she confessed. "But I can't be the reason you give up on your dreams." His heart sank. The pressure of the decision was becoming unbearable. He remembered all the times he hesitated, that he moved away when he should have gotten closer. What if I fail again? What if this opportunity isn't all it seems? Doubt consumed him. As the days went by, Mark felt more and more confused. He wanted to move on, but the thought of leaving Emily and Lucas devastated him. One day, while walking through the park, he saw Lucas playing with other children. The boy's smile lit up his heart, and he realized that not only was his future at stake, but also the impact that his decisions would have on their lives. At that moment, Mark had an epiphany. He could not choose between career and love, but rather find a balance. It was possible to pursue your dreams without abandoning the people you loved. He decided he needed to be honest with himself and with Emily. If he didn't try, he would always wonder what if. He returned home, his heart racing, and found Emily sitting on the couch. "I need to tell you something," he began, voice firm. "I don't want to leave. I want to find a way to grow in my career, but at the same time, I want to be here with you and Lucas." Her eyes lit up, and a wave of relief passed between them. "You don't have to choose between one or the other. We can find a way," she said, hope shining in her eyes. Mark realized that by facing his fears, he had found himself again. He had learned that true strength came from within, and that by allowing himself to feel and be vulnerable, he was building a richer, more meaningful future. At that moment, Mark felt a transformation. He was no longer the man who hesitated to commit or let fear guide his decisions. He was on a path of growth, facing his insecurities and embracing the connections that mattered. And so, in that small space of time, he knew he was ready to face whatever challenge came next, no longer alone, but surrounded by love and support. Mark sat next to Emily, the weight of the decision still hanging between them, but now there was a new light in his eyes. He reflected on how he had gotten there. In the last few days, he had lost himself in his anxieties, but at that moment, with renewed determination, he felt stronger. "What do you think we can do together?" he asked, curiosity mixed with hope. Emily smiled, a smile that seemed to light up the room. "We can start planning. You've always talked about how you wanted to grow in your career, and maybe there are ways you can pursue that here instead of moving away," she suggested. Mark felt relief. The simple fact of having a partnership, of not being alone in this decision, made all the difference. "What if I started looking for local opportunities? Maybe I can get more involved in projects that interest me," he said, the idea taking shape in his mind. The sparkle in Emily's eyes grew as she considered the possibilities. "And it would also give us more time together. Lucas would love to know that you're more present. He always talks about you when he's drawing," she added, with a touch of affection in her voice. In the following days, Mark launched himself into a new phase of his life. He began connecting with local professionals, attending workshops, and pursuing projects that stimulated him. With every step he took, he felt more confident. He realized that, instead of feeling trapped, he was freeing himself from the bonds he had created. Conversations with Emily became deeper and more meaningful. They talked about their dreams, their insecurities, and this strengthened the bonds between them even more. Lucas, in his innocent way, also began to notice the changes. He was amused to see Mark more present, and his laughter echoed throughout the house. One day, while they were drawing together in the park, the boy looked at Mark and asked, "Are you going to stay here forever?" The simple, direct question made Mark's heart race, but he answered sincerely, "Yes, Lucas. I will stay here, and I will do my best to always be by your side." Lucas's expression brightened, and Mark felt that promise was a commitment he really wanted to keep. In the midst of this new routine, Mark began to reflect on his past failures. He remembered moments when he hesitated to make decisions, when he let himself be carried away by the fear of the unknown. Now, he understood that failure was not the end, but rather an opportunity to start over. He thought about how many times he had felt stuck and how those experiences had shaped him. "I may fail, but that doesn't define who I am," he muttered to himself, a new perspective blossoming in his mind. One night, while they were in the kitchen, Emily turned to him and said, "You know, I admire how dedicated you are to this. You are changing, and it is beautiful to see." Mark smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "That's because I have you and Lucas by my side. You make me want to be a better person." He realized that true success was not just about professional achievements, but about building a life full of love, support, and companionship. As time passed, Mark and Emily's lives became a harmonious dance between their dreams and their responsibilities. They became a team, facing challenges together. Moments of uncertainty still came, but now they approached them differently. Mark learned to communicate his concerns and listen to Emily's, and this brought new depth to their relationship. The wisdom he had gained throughout this journey began to be reflected in his daily actions. He allowed himself to be vulnerable, to share his fears and hopes. He realized that life was full of complexities and that there were no easy answers, but that didn't discourage him. On the contrary, he felt more prepared to face whatever came his way, now with a more open mind and a lighter heart. The lessons Mark learned also impacted his friendships. He reconnected with old friends, sharing his experiences and listening to theirs. The conversations became more meaningful, and he realized how essential relationships were to his personal growth. He remembered how he once felt isolated in his worries, but now, by opening up, he created a circle of support around him. Mark realized that friendships, even unexpected ones, could change lives. He remembered a coworker who always encouraged him and decided to get in touch. The reunion brought up conversations he hadn't had in years, and together, they discussed their aspirations and challenges. This renewed connection made Mark see that he was never truly alone on his journey. In that new chapter of life, Mark learned to value every little moment. He began spending more time with Lucas, teaching him to draw and explore the world around him. He realized that while he was pursuing his personal growth, he was also helping Lucas discover his own passions. This cycle of support and love grew stronger and stronger, and Mark knew that no matter the challenges ahead, he and his family would face everything together. Mark's life changed, and he finally understood that true success came from a place of love, connection, and self-discovery. He had overcome his limitations and was now ready to face any challenge, no longer alone, but surrounded by those who truly mattered. Mark looked out the window, watching the leaves on the trees sway gently in the wind. It was hard to believe that only a few months had passed since he sat next to Emily, filled with uncertainty and fear. Now, your life will take a new direction, full of possibilities and growth. He felt that every step he took had shaped him, not just as a professional, but as a human being. The impact of his journey was not limited to just him. All around him, changes were visible. Lucas, who previously only drew, now explored different forms of art. He had become more confident, and the joy in his eyes was contagious. Mark was proud to see how his presence had helped the boy express himself and discover his passions. Their relationship blossomed, and afternoons spent together became moments of learning and fun. The connection they shared was a reflection of the love and support Mark had chosen to provide. Emily also experienced the changes. With Mark's new energy, she felt inspired to pursue her own dreams. Together, they discussed ideas and exchanged feedback on projects, creating an encouraging environment that benefited everyone. Mark realized that the strength of their union had become a solid foundation on which they could both grow. He reflected on how open communication and vulnerability brought out a deeper, truer love. The lessons Mark had learned along the way echoed in his mind. He remembered the times he hesitated, the decisions he didn't make for fear of what could go wrong. Now, looking back, I saw that each failure was a step towards learning. He understood that starting over was not a sign of weakness, but an opportunity to reinvent himself. The wisdom he acquired had made him aware that life was a series of ups and downs, and that each experience had its value. During a conversation with a reconnected friend, Mark realized how he wasn't the only one going through transformations. Others also failed and started over, and sharing these stories created an even stronger bond between them. He understood that friendship was a fundamental support network in times of difficulty. These often unexpected connections brought new meaning to his life, and he felt grateful to have cultivated them. True success, Mark reflected, was no longer associated with material achievement. What really mattered was the quality of the relationships he had built and the peace he felt within himself. He understood that love and human connection were the greatest riches anyone could accumulate. Happiness was no longer a distant goal, but a constant presence in his daily life, reflected in small moments, such as the laughs shared with Lucas and the deep discussions with Emily. Over time, Mark became an example for others. People around him began to notice the change in his attitude. He had become a beacon of hope, showing that it was possible to overcome limitations and start over. By sharing his journey, he inspired others to challenge themselves and seek their own path. The impact he was making on people's lives was becoming increasingly evident, and Mark felt a deep sense of purpose in his new direction. One sunny day, while walking with Emily and Lucas through the park, Mark felt a rush of gratitude. He looked at them and realized that true happiness was there, in that simple, everyday moment. He had learned to value every moment, to live in the present, and to appreciate the little things in life. The harmony that now reigned in his home and in his heart was the result of a joint effort, and he knew that the journey would still continue, full of challenges and joys. Mark smiled as he thought about everything he had been through and everything that was yet to come. He had found a new meaning in his life, and the peace he felt always accompanied him. He knew that no matter what the future held, he was no longer alone. With love, friendship, and the courage to rise again, Mark was ready to embrace life in all its fullness, knowing that each step forward was a celebration of his journey. Mark walked alongside Emily and Lucas, absorbing every detail of those sunny hours in the park. The laughter of children playing in the background and the fresh smell of cut grass mixed with the sweet scent of flowers. It was a perfect day, and he felt grateful for everything he had achieved. As he watched Lucas chase a colorful kite, Mark reflected on how much his life had changed. He still remembered the dark days when doubts and fears paralyzed him. The failures he faced were no longer painful memories, but rather stepping stones that led him to a new understanding of himself and what really mattered. "I used to think success was having a good job and money in the bank," he told Emily as they walked. "But now I see that true richness is in the relationships we build and the joy we find in the little things." Emily smiled, agreeing. "You taught me so much about the importance of living in the moment and valuing connections. Sometimes I lose track of what really matters, but you always remind me." She looked at Lucas, who was now trying to pull the kite up. "And watching him grow and express himself is the greatest gift we could have." Mark felt his heart warm when he heard those words. The love and friendship he had cultivated throughout his journey had become the foundation of his new life. He realized that every laugh shared, every deep conversation, and every challenge overcome brought with it a lesson. "No matter what happens from now on, I know that I am surrounded by people who support me and that together we can face anything," he commented. Lucas, listening to the conversation, interrupted with a sparkle in his eyes. "You won't believe it, but the kite is flying higher than ever." His excitement was infectious, and Mark couldn't help but laugh. "That's because you believed you could make her fly, Lucas. Believing in yourself is the first step to achieving your dreams." The boy nodded proudly. "I want to be an artist, just like you, Mark." Lucas's statement made Mark's heart fill with emotion. He had become a mentor, but also a friend. "You're already an artist, Lucas. Art comes from within, and you have an incredible talent. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." As the sun began to set, turning the sky orange and pink, Mark felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He realized that his experiences of failure and starting over were not just part of his story, but his identity. He had learned that life was made of cycles, and true strength was knowing how to get up after each fall. Sometimes life takes us in unexpected directions, Mark reflected, looking at the horizon. And it is in these moments that we discover who we really are. Every mistake, every new beginning, every friendship, all of this shapes us. Emily took Mark's hand, holding it tightly. And that is what makes us human. The ability to learn, love, and rise again is what makes life worth living. As night began to fall, Mark felt a wave of peace. He knew the journey was far from over, but now he was prepared. With a smile on his face, he looked at his family and friends and felt assured that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face it together. Happiness radiated from his soul. He had learned that life was not just about reaching a destination, but about enjoying the journey. And with this new understanding, he was ready to embrace whatever the future held for him. Mark looked at the audience and, in an inspiring tone, left a final message. If you feel lost or face difficulties, remember that every new beginning is an opportunity. Don't be afraid to fail, because it is through failures that we find our true path. And always value the connections you make throughout your life. They are the true riches. He invited everyone to share their own stories of overcoming and starting over. Let's create a support network together where we can inspire each other. Comment below about your experiences, and if you liked the story, like and subscribe for more content that touches the heart. Let's celebrate life's journey together. With that, Mark felt that, like his own story, theirs was just beginning.